Welcome to the State of Cybersecurity Industry panel series. We are proud to bring together decades of cybersecurity experience from world-class experts, executives, and strategic advisors. We will explore the present and future of cybersecurity evolution, talk about compliance and regulation, best practices, emerging threats, and the impact on the IoT and OT device market.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Evgeniy, and I'll be the moderator for the State of Cybersecurity Industry panel brought to you by Cybits. Today's topic is Software Bill of Materials, SBOM, illustrating the future of CI/CD pipeline. I have several guests here that are going to help me to talk about this topic. I want to introduce first Sanket Pacha, lead architect of emerging technologies in Unisys Global.
Hey, Evgeniy, nice to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Stuart Phillips, Product Marketing Director at Interos.
Very nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Dragos Ruiu, CEO of Dragos Tech.
Hi, nice to see you.
Thank you. And Chris Blask, VP of Strategy at Cybits.
Good to see all of you.
Thank you, Chris. The requirement of software bill of material is part of long-term trend in development efficiency. Many developers have been implementing the system necessary to produce SBOMs as part of their ongoing improvements plan. We will discuss why leading software developers have undertaken changes in recent years in order to make SBOM not only possible, but desirable. This is a live show, so please ask questions in YouTube chat. We will definitely get to them in the end of the show, where I'm looking forward for the great discussions. And let's begin with our first topic. I'm wondering, SBOM is a relatively new term, but it doesn't mean we didn't do something similar in advance or in the past. We had README files, for example. So who wants to talk first about how we did SBOMs or what came before SBOMs? Before we came out with the term.
Yeah, Evgeniy, I can take that one. So before SBOMs, right, like you said, the software bill of materials, it's been there for a while. It's not something that's new term. It's just that there was no standard way of sharing this information to your downstream customers as to what goes inside your package. It's essentially nothing but an ingredient list. And like you said, we've had README files, we've had PDF documents that were shared as to what goes inside your software. And that's basically it. And in fact, that is even the state of SBOMs at this point of time, until we have this whole executive order that has taught us on how we want to share that information, how we want to create these SBOMs and share it with your downstream customers to avoid zero-day attacks. So no standardization, just documents to be shared before, if I can put it in a simple sentence.
Now, did people aggregate the README files? Did they aggregate the PDF files? How do they save them? How do they review them? What they kind of count? How they manage them?
Great question and no great answer to it, actually, to be very honest. There hasn't been a good way. Typically, these files are created by people who are not even involved in the SDLC, the software development lifecycle. They're just done by a bunch of folks who deliver the software. They're not part of the entire development process, which is why it's sometimes error prone. It has issues. It's not complete sometimes. So there are a lot of issues with the way SBOMs were dealt with traditionally.
Yeah, I have a question from a listener very quickly. Maybe, Chris, can you quickly explain in like elevator pitch what is SBOM to add? what's it?
Sure, a software bill of materials, like a traditional bill of materials for a box of whatever, is what's inside it. And the U.S. federal government had an executive order last year to come up with a standard format for SBOMs. And if I'm not mistaken, there's 8 fields, that need to be in there. So like a recipe for or contents of anything, it's to a certain level, which can be taken, to our other guests know better than I, to extremes.
And we will definitely go deeper to talk about other options and why it's important. Anybody else wants to comment about SBOMs and how people work with them before?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, one of the challenges is, you have an engineering team and they're using open source software. You typically, what you would do is when you go to develop the documentation, you would ask them what open source tools they're using and how they're gathering this information. The challenge is that a lot of this is sort of ad hoc, right? That if the engineering team doesn't report or someone doesn't say, they're using these things, it can be really challenging. And then again, what version of the software they're using, what licenses are associated with it, can be, it can be extremely challenging. And we see that with like the recent Log4j incident, where even today, about 40% of the downloads off of the Apache Foundation website are the insecure version of Log4j. And that what's happening is, what you see is what you expect is that, development teams have, Python scripts to do builds. They have build tools that are set up. They're downloading the version of software they're used to. They're going and building their software with the insecure version, of Log4j. And they haven't updated or haven't sort of adapted to this idea of being able to support, to know that they're using the wrong software. Again, because most of this is automated and very few people are actually looking at it in real time.
This actually leads very interestingly to a question. If SBOM should help the CI/CD pipeline and if it should be there, if you're talking about Log4j, for example. Because if I understand correctly, if I use SBOM, I will know the version of my Log4j. I will know right away they're vulnerable. They may not even reach to CI/CD pipeline, or maybe SBOM need to be somewhere else in the CI/CD pipeline. Stuart, do you want to comment on this part?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm sorry. Let someone else talk. But yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. So the challenge being, of course, is I know Log4j is prevalent in most Java software that has logging, and that you are able to, you look at the downloads, the information that was provided. A lot of the software can be downloaded anonymously. I don't necessarily know which vendor has it. The challenges I have is I know some of the vendors I'm associated with. I know some of the software that we're using, and then trying to figure out what version of software is available, what's obsolete, what challenges I have there. If I had SBOM and the way that SBOM is supposed to work, I should be able to very quickly run a simple query across my the software and applications that we're using within the organization, know what versions of Log4j are there, if they are there, and if they are the obsolete version, and be able to prioritize those for patching or updating or mitigation or replacement. So the idea with SBOM is exactly what you think. It should be able to say, do we have Log4j? Yes. And where is it? Here. What version of it? It was this version. Is that the obsolete version? Yes. Okay, fix it. It should just be very simple to do that. Right now, it's incredibly difficult.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I can give you an example right now, because I'm just in the middle of I'm involved in an audit with a small organization, and I asked them, well, give me a list of all your software dependencies. So the developers handed over a big package of JSON files. Here's the JSON files of everything that we've got in our system. But the issue there is that you've got all these dependencies, and then those dependencies have a container inside them that have dependencies that you don't know, and so on. So it's a very laborious and time-consuming manual process right now to go through and actually find all those dependencies and then check them. it's really no wonder a lot of organizations don't even bother.
Yeah.
Well, and it's, it's to your point, Dragos, there's a level of attestation you can get to, structurally you can ask for anything. I'm going to send this chip and this software to Mars. I want to know who shoveled the sand, right? I want to know what shovel they used, and to make the crystal that the chip was cut from, and so on and so forth. And structurally, as Sanket, as you start looking at attestation ecosystems and so forth, you can see how that goes together. But what to the point of this question, right? SBOMs themselves are an attestation at a given point in time about a thing. They're not the only one. So, for those, I am not the CI/CD expert on the panel. Exactly where are we today with all these vast, complex software management and development systems? But an SBOM that comes out that is expressed and exposed to a customer or a partner outside the corporate entity is at the end of a long trail. And I think a lot of those attestations come down to things, riffing on what you said, Dragos, that are just operational. How can I track the contingencies? It's taking too long. It's taking too much time. It's costing too much. Can I be more profitable and productive and competitive if I add this system of tracking, which SBOM is the tip of the iceberg that we just happen to see right now, but it's been coming for a long time. There's more to it.
So you guys mentioned that we want dependencies. We want to understand more. And I guess the question here, if I want to go deeper, do I create SBOM every time I'm going to build and I want to go to production, or I do this once in a blue moon? And maybe we can compare it to vulnerability management, that in the past people used to do it once a week, months, a quarter, and right now when we talk about cloud, we want continuous vulnerability management.
I think if you're talking about CI/CD stacks, you got whatever your Jenkins files, whatever you're building, it should really, in an ideal world, be built as part of your software. It should be a part of your build processors. As you update everything, your SBOM should be one of the deliverables of your CI/CD pipeline as every time you produce a new build, because it's always constantly mutating. If you're going to snapshot it like that at periodic intervals, you are almost guaranteed to be out of date, and it's probably a process that's going to be error prone. So automating it in the long term is the final real solution, in my humble opinion, because we're trying to remove some of that drudgery, some of that tracking work from the humans, and provide tools for that sorts of things, so that then those things can be delivered to their customers and their customers, so on and down the chain. I personally think that if you're going to do this kind of snapshotting, you're probably doing more work than you ought to be there. Is the way I think of it. There, it really needs a machine approach to the problem.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail, Dragos, with that. The whole SBOM creation is something that happens right at when you develop the code. It's not a process that you do once you want to deliver a software. I think it's part of your development cycle, and that's where I think you need accountability, responsibility from the product owners, from the developers, to make sure they know what goes inside the software. Right? It's and not just what goes inside, what version of it goes inside the software, because we've seen in the past, right, with all these vulnerabilities that have come in the past couple of years, actually, the whole SolarWinds attack, and there's Log4j. I have seen interviews from big corporates that it took them days to figure out if Log4j actually affected their software, and that's just to figure it out. And we are not even talking about the remediation part of it. It takes ages for them to figure out. So if you have an SBOM, and again, I think, Dragos, you touched upon dependency after dependency, right? So what has typically been delivered in the past is just like the first level dependencies of your software. Nobody cares about the thousands of components that they depend on, and invariably what they depend on. So you get software that are 20 levels deep, and your vulnerabilities like Log4j is typically never going to be your first level dependency. It's somewhere like 5th or 6th level down. How do you even know which component that you are using has a Log4j dependency? And that's where these SBOMs come in really important, that you just don't create it for the first level, but you have a complete visibility, a complete transparency of your package right to the smallest bit that you can get into. And to answer your question, like, you develop SBOMs the moment you commit a piece of code, as simple as that.
Well, and if I can, just tie these, the ends together, now we're into the day by day, coding. Interos is a great example of a company that's been around for a long time, putting together, that at the business level. How deep is your supply chain, right? And it turns out that's hard. That takes a lot of work. And Stu, your thoughts tying these two things together: the business realities of actually knowing what your supply chain is, the demand for that, and what we're talking about here, and all the way down to an engineer hitting enter once.
Well, thank you, Chris. Again, Interos is focused on operational resilience. So the idea of understanding your supply chain in depth. And the way that we are sort of approaching this differently is we're using public feeds of information or data that we buy. So most information is done with surveys, right? I send you a survey that says, please tell me what components are in your software. And you say, I don't have time for this. So you already bought it, so I don't know what your problem is. So, we'll get right on that. And absolutely. Just right. This is February, so no later than Christmas. Anyway, so, and again, I don't know who's really going to fill it out and if they know what they're doing. But anyway, you get a survey and and by the time you get it and you read it and you don't like it, you're already in production, so there's not much you can do about it. So the real challenge is, we look at public sources of information. So, for example, SolarWinds. A lot of our customers were like, how do I know if somebody's using SolarWinds? And most of your threat is not in your direct suppliers, right? I know that I'm buying from this company. I know all about them. I can get a lot of information about them. I know who they are. And there are a lot of really good third-party risk tools that will monitor them. The problem is I don't know who they buy from and who they buy from. And so, for example, I'm dealing with you, you're fine, but then you're dealing with someone who's got an infected copy of SolarWinds, which is actively harvesting all the intellectual property across the network, that everything they can connect to. And again, with these internal connections, I have a lot of these non-traditional connections to these companies. So, for example, Kaseya was a very big problem because, you have devices that are being provisioned. I'm not sending that traffic through my firewall or through my WAF, right? That would just burn a lot of bandwidth that I don't have. It just comes through a private connection through my cloud provider. And so if it gets corrupted, if it gets compromised, it doesn't go through any of my traditional security tools, and it comes right into my network. And it's, again, a lot of my traditional approaches to security, all the things that we've spent years and billions of dollars on building, don't help me. So again, it's understanding those multiple tiers. And again, what we do, we have a business graph of about 300 million entities. We have about 100,000 feeds of information. We use AI and machine learning to associate them. And so, for example, with SolarWinds, we were able to quickly identify with a banking customer who had thousands of direct suppliers, just wanted to know who had SolarWinds, sent surveys out. Of course, this was over the holidays, so no one replied. And the feedback from the CISO was, I wasted my holiday and pissed off my family. But, by sending out surveys that no one ever responded to, and we were able to survey their suppliers and find this information. But we use that public information, mostly by like the fact that you had posted a job on Indeed or LinkedIn saying, I want a SolarWinds administrator. So that, sort of alternative. The real problem with SBOM is it needs to be complete, right? If the SBOM just says all this is from us, right? That's not true. You have components that came from other places, and you need to put in that information. So, there's a lot of issues with, companies completing and doing, the SBOM completely, which is again, like what Cybeats is focused on is, the completeness of the SBOM, right? That it needs to actually be a fully populated field, including like author. So for example, who the author of the software, we talk about versions of software, that's really important. But we've seen recently there's some significant issues with authors of software, either where there's someone who's not allowed to use that, I'll run on that software because I have a contract or I have a thing with the government that says, cannot use foreign nationals to update this software. This software is not supposed to leave the US. And then you go to 2 or 3 suppliers and you realize they outsourced the whole thing to a company in Romania because they were cheaper, and you didn't authorize that, but the person you deal with did, and they weren't supposed to. But now you've lost your big Air Force contract, and your company is going to have to restate earnings. Or there's you have people that are actually criminals, corrupt, or really angry because they didn't get that promotion, and they've gone through and polluted all the open source projects that they have access to. And then, as a development team, you have to go back and find out who that person is. That's what SBOM is supposed to be, right? That's what it's supposed to provide you. But again, it has to be completed. Somebody has to have filled it out properly and populated the information in there.
You bring a very, very important point that I'm going to touch base in a second. Before I do this, I want to thank you to Bobby and Jonathan that couldn't join us as a moderator. This is why you potentially, people that's watching right now, when they sign up 2 weeks ago, they may see different faces. So thank you for Bob and Jonathan, and I hope next time we will be able to talk to you as well. And Stuart, toward the points you bring, you mentioned and explained how important the SBOM and the SBOM being complete. But who is responsible on the SBOM? Who do actually the persons that need to do this? Is this the DevOps people, managers, security folks? Because it's easy to say, okay, we're going to introduce new technology or new process, but the moment somebody actually needs to do the work, people are like, we don't want to do this. So what's your take on this part, and who you think, or who is responsible in your company on creation of SBOM and maintains them?
Well, with the recent executive orders, they highlight SBOMs directly. So we see that there is a drive to SBOM. In fact, if you even look at the CISA announcement about Log4j, they talk, if we had SBOM, this would be much easier to deal with. So there's definitely a push from the U.S. federal government and from other organizations to drive SBOM. And I think that, again, the benefit of SBOM, is in the technology. You see a lot of technology adoption, like RFID, things like that were sort of hobbies for a while. But then when they started to get adopted by companies like Walmart, they become real technologies. They become real.
I think the technology is there, but who is responsible on actually maintains them, looking at them? Because even if I created SBOM and I found Log4j, but nobody alerted or nobody look on this, and it's just there.
But I think the driver has to be, the driver of RFID was Walmart, right? The driver of SBOM is going to be the U.S. federal government. But again, if I can't sell to the Air Force, if I can't sell to the FAA, if I can't sell to even state or local governments, unless I do SBOM, that's a big driver. And that's, again, it also levels the playing field, because then everybody has to do it. That's one of the challenges with these types of technology adoption is I'm a big, powerful company with a lot of money. Adopting a new technology is relatively easy. If you're a real small company and you have to adopt this technology, it has to be simplified. It has to be easy to adopt. It has to be easy to onboard. And so that's a big part of it. But at the same time, the buyer is the person who's going to have to enforce this. And if I tell you that you have to give me an SBOM, and it has to be fully populated, and it has to have proper attestation, I can enforce that, right? I can make that part of the criteria for purchase, just like a lot of companies use that for quality and things, and resilience, and a lot of the things that we buy for these types of things. We're seeing that now with our customers. They're doing cyber assessments of their customers, seeing that they are having poor cyber scores. And what we find is a lot of companies are skimping on cyber in order to be more profitable, thinking that, they're just going to get away with it and they're never really going to get hit. It's really not going to be a big deal. And so we're actually having our customers going back to these people and saying, you have really terrible cyber scores. I'm going to demand a discount from you because I think you're going to be more of a problem in the future. And I think that's what's going to happen with SBOM. If you can't provide an SBOM to me, if you can't provide a good SBOM to me that I can actually, is relevant, then either I'm going to go somewhere else, or I'm just going to, discount you. I'm going to mark, I'm going to
inside the company. Stuart,
yeah, I'm going
inside
to
the
weigh this
company.
in the contract, and I'm going to pay you less because of that.
Yeah, I'm with, so Stu and I, I'm with Stu. Stu's talking about the economic side of it, right? And I'll talk about the legal side for a second. And I'm really interested, for the real geeks among us, Dragos and Sanket, to get your thoughts on this, because I don't really know the answer, but I know it'll work out. Because as Stu said, the economics are what they are. And if I'm VP of sales of a big corporation and I can no longer sell because I'm not doing thing, guess what? We're doing thing now. And this is one of those things.
Agree.
So it'll get shaken out inside the organization. But for, as a, while I'm may not really be the geek I look like on TV, I understand this stuff fairly well, but I don't know exactly where inside the company the blame lies for this. But I know, as where Stu is going, I can enforce it. So I'll talk about legal, the policy side of this, the law side of this. When the VP of sales says, hey, I have to do this thing before I can continue doing business with the US federal government or some major client or market, they turn to the chief legal counsel, who changes contract language and so forth, so that you can actually do that. That's what really ramifies down into, what us gearheads think about, when, inside the organization, given that you have this current structure for developing large software, a big software house, and I've got, decades of code out there. I've got thousands of engineers. I've got roles and responsibilities just distributed all over the place. Where inside that, given, DevSecOps, this trend, which I believe in, in that set of structure to get security into these big code stacks, where does this really nail down? So other than, putting my faith in the lawyers and the economics, I'd like to ask Dragos, and Sanket, what are your thoughts? Where does this live?
I think there's a distinction that should be made, is where does it live right now and where should it live? Because right now, I mean, this kind of material is bread and butter for security audits right now. Every security audit is sort of like one of the standard items is, let's check do you have any outdated versions? So right now, a lot of that responsibility is especially in smaller organizations, is going to outside consultants, and is going to the folks that do the security audits. So when the contractor calls for you ask your vendor, have you done your security audit? And part of that is checking your software bill of materials, looking for vulnerable components, etc. I think that is going into the auditing function right now. Where should it be? I think that's a different question, because I think you need to bring that much more sec DevOps, bring that much more into the mainline whole flow workflow of the whole development team and the R&D group. In my humble opinion.
Right. So I think I do concur, Dragos, what you think. Right? And at some point, this whole DevOps practice, like what Evgeniy you have, right? It's more moving towards the automation side of things, where, previously, I think just till September, right, there was no standardization for SBOM. And now you have SPDX as one of the formats that's been ISO certified to be that standard through which you can create SBOMs and share SBOMs with your downstream customers. And now, since that standard has come in, there's a lot of automation around it. So it's more like, yes, it's a responsibility of your DevSecOps team to make sure that your SBOM is complete. It does not have vulnerabilities that are known, at least not the high-end critical ones. But many companies are moving towards automating this process so that there's not one responsible person. It's a process in place, right? It's becoming part of their practice. It's something that just happens. You really don't worry about it. You really don't have to think about it. That's how people are taking this now. The whole concept of creating SBOMs and the responsibility for it.
Do you think that the companies in the future will have like a separate view, SBOM for internal view and SBOM for external view, that maybe have limited about information or level of different information?
Absolutely. So right now, most of the companies do that, because when you talk about the CI/CD pipeline, right, you you build every day, right? You commit code every 5 minutes for that matter, right? If you are creating SBOMs as part of your CI/CD pipeline, you don't want those SBOMs completed, delivered every single time, right? You need these internal ones for auditing to make sure that what you have built or what your software contains is not vulnerable at this point of time. So I think there is definitely two separate views, an internal view and an external view for the SBOMs. And you can pick and choose, to whom you want to share that information and how much you want to share that information, because you could be creating multiple types of software packages. You have multiple downstream customers, and you need to just make sure what information you share to your downstream customers as well. So I truly believe there will be two separate views, one for internal consumption, for internal audits, and one that goes to your external view, which is more outside.
We didn't talk about SBOM and metrics, but SBOM, it's a way to show that you're not vulnerable, that you have a good clean code. But if there's a problems with the code, and Stuart, you mentioned that potentially if there's a vendor with a lot of problems, you ask for discount. So is there going to be a need to show maturity of how they improved? How do you think it will happen? And if it's a part of CI/CD pipeline, or it's completely separate process to show maturity in SBOM creation, or how clean is your code?
Yeah, I think, in a large development organization, you have the concept of technical debt, right? That you are accumulating work because you're using older versions of software, or your tools are essentially out of date, or there are things that you really should be doing to retool the factory. You accumulate that. And then what will happen is at some point you will decide to stop developing and address your technical debt. So, for example, a lot of customers believe somehow that, like, if you uncover that you're using the old version of Log4j, somehow this giant red flashing light goes off in the development center and everybody runs around fixing it, right? If we've already scheduled a release for August and it's already been announced and customers are already waiting for it, I may not be able to fix it until then, unless it's a really big deal. And, it may be an issue, but I can't necessarily turn the ship around right away. If I'm a really small shop and I have a really small piece of software, I may not have the resources. Maybe I only have one part-time developer who comes in 2 days a week or is available 2 days a week, and I've already scheduled them out for a year. So, it's not possible for companies to turn around. And even if they did, I still want to test it, right? Okay, we are using the old version of Log4j. Absolutely, I totally understand that. We need to use the new version of Log4j. I can't push an update to all my customers without testing it first, and testing is backed up for 3 months. So are we going to cancel the new release that our CEO just already promised our customers? Or are we going to miss that Air Force contract date that we are really kind of critical on for funding? Or that thing we promised our investors was going to happen? Or do I just go ahead and pull the trigger and say, yeah, we got to stop and we got to fix this? And in reality, if you live in the real world, you realize that a lot of companies are just not able to address these things very, very quickly. SBOM will dramatically reduce that issue. And I think the thing that will come in is to say, I'm buying this software, I have it installed, it's got a vulnerability now that's been announced. I can find that because of SBOM, and I will expect an update or a patch from this customer, hopefully. But in the meantime, I have to deal with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it behind a WAF, or I'm going to make changes, or I'm going to change the configuration, which is instructions on, if I can. But I'm going to have to deal with it until I get the patch. But it's not realistic that, someone's just going to send me a patch in we'll have a patch for you tomorrow. It's not really going to, real world doesn't work that way. In fact, when we were working with our customers on, prioritizing their Log4j activities, the number one thing we recommended is they look at the financial health of their suppliers. Because a lot of times if the supplier is out of business or has been bankrupt or has had significant financial issues, they're just not in a position, if they're out of business, they're never going to give you a patch, right? And a lot of companies send surveys to suppliers like once a year, once every 2 years, something like that, saying, hey, how's it going? Please fill out we generated a couple hundred questions. Could you fill it out and send it back? So a lot of times companies don't even know what the state of their suppliers are. According to Gartner, something like 45% of companies don't even monitor their first direct suppliers, right? So they don't have an idea of what's going on with their, current suppliers. And so again, the idea that somehow, companies know exactly who their suppliers are, what the state of their suppliers is, and that those suppliers are able to turn around a fix very quickly and get it back to you. That's not the real world. What would be incredibly helpful is to have SBOM, to know it. Even if I had it from a company that was out of business, I would know, if it was vulnerable or not. I don't have to rely upon them. And then I'm able to make decisions at that point. That should I replace it? Should I prioritize it for replacement? I can't replace it right now because that's how everybody processes their credit cards. And I can't just shut down the hotel chain because of this, right? Maybe I'll put it behind a WAF, or I'll change some, configuration, or I'll just turn up, my security tools to the maximum and bring in an extra analyst just to sit there and watch it.
Yeah. Thank you.
But those, the reality is it's just a very difficult situation.
It's even more difficult. Sometimes it's not even external. I mean, sometimes it's an old developer has gone away and they left this chunk of code that nobody's going to touch and nobody wants to touch because it's rickety and it's working. And please don't touch it. Please don't do anything with it, anything to it. And you sometimes don't even know what's inside that code. So sometimes the problem isn't even an external supplier. It can be just an internal legacy issue.
Yeah, where I worked before, they used to call it FTL, right? Fix this later. That would be the comment code. The comment code would be FTL. And like, Well,
what I like about this question and the topic for this panel is that what we're really talking about is the engineers, are being asked by the financial people and the legal people, how do I do this? Yeah, and it's all about transparency. The answer is as much as you want. Stu, you touched on the author thing. If John had been here, been able to make this call, he could talk about in toto, right? Just knowing the custody of who touched the software during development, from here to there, like just internally, Dragos, right? Just that by itself can generate as much information as you can possibly want. So, with my engineer hat, my geek hat firmly on, the answer is yes. How much do you want? We can bury you with visibility to your last dime, right? But that's a great philosophical answer. But today, if I'm big corporation A, if I'm Unisys or Interos or Dragos, I'm talking, advising people, where does this live right now to do what to what level? Hell of a question.
Yeah.
I think there's also the other question is, how sincere is your software bill of materials? Because I think that there's a tendency for folks to kind of checklist things. Okay, hey, let's grab the first level components and deliver that as the deliverable, instead of actually really thoroughly looking at it and looking at it as a problem solution. If it's just a thin veneer of, hey, let's take the top level components that we have in our software and deliver that as our software bill of materials, that kind of denatures some of the value of that. So the folks' heart and they have to get buy-in from their engineering team on the process for this to actually really work, because it can be short-circuited if people just treat it as a checklist item that has to be delivered to the customers, rather isn't something that they really use themselves and really check and really verify.
Not just delivered. You want to create and make sure you have no vulnerabilities, like people mentioned here. No, there's just no point to create them. You need to somebody actually need to investigate and look.
Well, I learned something today. Stu, you mentioned the companies are already looking at the rating their suppliers and customers, and saying, I want a discount if you suck. And Dragos, right? If this is the sort of thing in normal business, if your suppliers are more or less sincere, you pick that up. It's a human thing. You learn it over time. And this, I think, enunciates that even better, because if somebody really wants to send you SBOMs or express their software inventory they're sending to you insincerely, it's probably going to show up. You can get away with anything once or twice, but as a business practice, those who do this provide more transparency. We're seeing this already. And so the early POCs and so forth is that what you mostly get by sharing this, visibility into what you're selling your customers is shorter sales cycles and better customer relationships, because you're just telling the truth, and you're telling them what they're going to see anyways, right? So, like I say, technically we can give you, and in some cases we will. I want to know exactly what machine was running what software that made this physical thing that was part of this mechanical thing that went boom, and who touched it and everything else. In most cases, we won't, because it's not that important.
Brings up a good point, Chris. I mean, let's say I just wanted to generate SBOMs internally, right? No one even asked me for an SBOM. I just started doing it internally. One is an irrevocable record, right? No one can go back and change it or update the logs or make it look like they actually did check the software when they never did. And of course, you've never heard of stuff like that, so I'm sure you're shocked, but just don't faint. Just bear with me. I create an SBOM, right? I create a record of what software was used when. If I'm an internal development manager and I do have to measure technical debt, right? I'm planning out my next year. I'm looking at, okay, so show me what versions of software I'm using. I can very quickly find that out. I can very quickly compare those to the current versions of software. I can very quickly assess the amount of work involved. So that's going to save me hundreds or thousands of hours and again, be a much better result from my effort, right? I am actually addressing my issues. The second thing is coming back to something you said was, I'm a security auditor, right? I'm working inside the company. I want to look at our software. I want to look for vulnerabilities. I want to look for threats and bugs and things like that. Knowing what versions of open source are in the software and being able to confirm that and being able to understand that quickly, create those recommendations for engineering, create the recommendations for the security configuration, looking at potential vulnerabilities and things like that. Again, as a security auditor, that's going to save me hundreds of thousands of hours. And as I always say, right, time is money and people are money. So, if it's going to save you, if it saves you 500 hours at $375 an hour, it's very easy to map that out. What does that cost, right? So again, it becomes very available. And the third thing, again, is if I do have an issue where I say, okay, I do have to replace this, I can know with absolute certainty what versions of software have what versions of Log4j. The way that we do it now, most companies in development, and like where I worked before, they would have to go through and test, or they'd have to look into logs, or they'd have to run some sort of Log4j vulnerability assessment tool against the various versions of software in order to create some sort of reliable rule. So I think even adopting SBOM internally and using it for your own processes, you could have a significant reduction in costs and a significant improvement in quality and product.
You'll certainly save on audit costs, because it's one of the first things any auditor is going to ask you, right? Is show me what's in your stuff, and so we want to see it. So it has an immediate cost benefit if you've got that pre-made and pre-built part of your process. The challenge that you face, I'll give you the example of what I'm facing this week, actually, is a small organization, and I have asked them for essentially their software bill of materials, and they had to scramble around. I got a bunch of JSON files, and now we were trying to figure out and that's costing them money. It's making their audit more expensive. It's making it a more laborious process. If they would have had that done as a part of their processes from the very beginning, or if they would have tracked that all along their development, they wouldn't have had to go and spend that development. But the challenge for a small development organization is that you've got screaming bug fixes and customer over here who wants this changed right now, or this sort of long-term work to build the SBOM process. And for a small stretch development team, there's that push-pull versus, long-term good or put out the short-term fire. And unfortunately, I've seen that. I've seen where that answer goes, and it's always usually the short-term fire. So,
yeah, it comes up to a good point, because traditionally, like if you're onboarding suppliers, one of the main ways to get to, ask for a SOC 2 audit, right? Say, hey, have you done a SOC 2 audit recently? Could you provide that? We'd like to, look at that. Well, a SOC 2 audit is great, but it costs between $30,000 and $100,000, depending on the size of your organization.
It doesn't go all the way as well.
Company, you're not necessarily, coming back to something Chris said, you're making a shovel for the Mars lander. Well, how many companies do you think make shovels for Mars landers, right? 100, 200? No, 3, maybe 1. right? And if they do exist, you have to, the government, NASA funds them, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to stay in business, right? Because I'm going to make one of these, one every 3 years. So I can't be laying these there's already a ton of burdens on these companies. SBOM could be a dramatically less expensive way to address a lot of these by automating most of the process. Yeah.
I want to switch topics a bit and talk about attestation and supply chain and how they exist in the CI/CD pipeline. Chris, maybe you want to start on this part?
Sure. And Sanket is the current technical genius on all this stuff, because, so the DBOM thing, where Sanket and I got involved at Unisys on this, is how we have an ecosystem of channels and nodes to share things around, right? And, we're all looking at this industry right now. So everybody on this panel and these conversations we have, we're all figuring this out right now. We don't exactly know the entire stack and model that's going to happen in an enterprise. As we've been discussing here, we haven't all really decided, how an SBOM differs from all the other attestations internally and externally and so forth. So I think this calendar year we'll work through adopting a lot of this stuff, and next calendar year we'll get to the point where we're getting the if I cans to, the Interos levels deep, 5-7 layers deep into supply chains and automating that. That's where we really have to get into better attestation, sharing, and linkage than simply, faxing a PDF to a single customer, right? Right now, companies that produce software and need to produce SBOMs are looking to do this in small volumes to individual individual relationships. What happens when we really do want to go 17 layers deep and find out, the custody of the software that was running on the radial forge that made a jet engine blade in Scotland? That's, for me, that's the most fascinating thing to see how this unfolds over the next 12, 24 months. So I'll throw it to Sanket. What do you think?
I agree, Chris. I think generating SBOMs is one thing, which is solving one spectrum of the problems. I think the whole sharing thing is a completely different game altogether, right? How do you make sure that you share that information to your customers and in a continuous manner, right? I mean, we are moving towards SaaS, we're moving towards continuously evolving software packages. How do you make sure that the SBOMs that you generate and you share are up to date? And when we talk about SBOMs, right, it's not just the software, right? It's the infrastructure that goes behind it, the environment that you've created it into, and the vulnerabilities associated with those, because it matters, right? At the end of the day, when you're looking at vulnerabilities, it's not just in the package, but even the periphery around it. So I agree. I think it's a make or break year, I think, for the whole attestations, supply chain attestations. There is some serious thought put into it now. I think it was just a byproduct these days, ever since I've got into this world, the whole concept of SBOMs and sharing attestations was a byproduct of your development cycle. But now that has gained traction, it's become more a mainstream. It's something that's consciously been looked into as to how do you create these attestations, how do you share them, how do you standardize them, and once you have all of that, how do you put them into your existing CI/CD pipeline? And I'm pretty sure most organizations are now on the CI/CD pipeline. It's not new for them. So they're trying to automate things, like I said before, not having to do this manually, but get a process in place, get a practice in place, do it, just let it happen. You don't have to worry about it being done. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on it.
Thank you. Stuart, Dragos, anything on your end?
I think actually it's going to become easier, because once the vendors start providing this material sort of as a matter of course, creating your own SBOM will become easier, and it'll just sort of daisy chain into if it becomes when it should become adopted and across the industry. As the vendors start providing it, then your own company can start providing it to your downstream customers, and I think it'll just kind of trickle like a river once the dam breaks and everybody really begins to begins to adopt it. And to jump back, I think everybody really, if you're in this software industry right now and you're not looking at continuous development and continuous build processes, then you've got your developers already screaming about your technical debt and probably beating you up already. Everybody who's still doing manual builds is really using Stone Age tools now by modern levels, and there's a lot of organizations that are still using Stone Age tools, but hopefully glacially it'll improve.
Pick your brain on this part, because how the big companies actually benefit of the improvements in CI/CD pipeline, because in development, because a lot of automation done, and you guys mentioned also about the automation. So tell me, what do you see the changes, the improvement, how it become better?
I can give you a couple of sort of examples. I think, companies like Veracode and static analyzers and some of those things, I think there's a lot of tools that can be built in to CI/CD pipelines that are sort of high effort and high intensity to use on a one-off basis, and using older, more manual build processes. I think you can put in a lot of sort of automation for your developers that will really sort of save you a lot of security checks down the line. Static analyzers being the first and most visible component there of those sorts of things. But there's also, QA testing. There's lots of things that you get with fairly cheaply, as opposed to doing it by having a separate QA department or by having the older sort of more manual processes. And I think that to me is the sales pitch that I think that most people will be paying attention. At least that's my perspective. And I mostly see snapshots of companies as I do audits them from external viewpoints. So I'm not really involved on a day-to-day development basis. I usually get dropped in and I get a snapshot of a company and say, hey, take a look at all this stuff we're doing. Tell us what we're doing wrong for security. So from my perspective as an external snapshot of a couple of companies, I see that almost everybody switching to that sort of philosophy right now. I don't see many people who are holding back on that. My 2 cents.
Stuart, Sanket?
I totally agree with that. I think that we see a significant number of customers who are looking at SBOM, particularly in the federal space, that they're looking at how they can adopt it, how to leverage it, how they can use it as a competitive advantage. I think a lot of the advantage here is that nobody really believes the current process works, right? That the way that you audit software, the way that you you connect to things. There are a lot of really good tools out there that do analysis. The problem is you typically have to have complete access to something to be able to analysis, right? I buy from Chris, who buys from Dragos. Great. I go to Dragos and I say, hey, I want to look at your software. And he goes, who are you? I don't know who you are, and I have no relationship with you. I don't even know who you are, right? So again, a lot of this is the multi-tier relationship, the hidden supply chain. I buy from someone who buys from someone who buys from someone who's a sanctioned Russian steel mill because they sell arms to Iran illegally. I don't know that, right? Until I investigate that, but I may not know that. I may uncover that in the SBOM. The challenge here is a lot of companies that are committing these types of crimes go out of their way to obscure what they're doing, right? People who, you go to this sanctioned Russian steel mill company, I'll show you where the Wikipedia page is. It talks about how they're, the heroes of the Soviet Union during World War II, or the Great Patriotic War, as we call it. And they have a great chess team. They have a world-class chess team. At no point does it talk about how they're sanctioned because they're basically arming our enemies. And you're not supposed to buy from them. So again, a lot of companies are, that this information is not forthcoming. So I think that once, the big difference here is, again, we've seen this over and over and over again. Once you start uncovering information, the big question is, like, what do I do with it, right? Who is responsible for this? We do demonstrations for customers, and we'll say, here, I'll put you in here and let me show you who you're connected to. and let me show you what sanctions or what companies are sanctioned that you're dealing directly with or indirectly with. And I'll have customers go, no, please don't show me things that I'm, don't show me those companies that are sanctioned, because I don't have the resources to deal with them. If you show it to me, I got to do something about it. Tell my boss, please don't show me that. I believe you, but I can't look at our stuff. Can you show me somebody else? Show me my competitor. Let's look at my competitor. So again, a lot of this is, there's going to be a lot of information uncovered in SBOM. And I think one of the biggest challenges, again, is technical debt, right? I'm using a 17-year-old version of OpenSSL that has never been updated and is actually not actively supported, but it's a basis for how we do encryption in our product. Once you know that haunts you, right? That kind of information, you have to deal with it, right? In a lot of cases right now, you're not aware of that, or it's not an issue. Log4j was not an issue to anybody on December 1st, right? That's where this is coming up. SolarWinds, the biggest issue with SolarWinds is they're based in Texas, which is subject to a higher number of natural disasters and climate change impact because they're based, because they're in Texas. So from a cyber point of view, they were fine. They were green as far as, a lot of companies, if you looked at a lot of the third-party risk tools, they were just fine. They had done a SOC 2 audit. They were fine. So a lot of these problems are going to come out of nowhere. They're going to come out of situations. I own gas stations. We have gas pumps that I lease from a third party, and they run the old version of Windows 7. So they are maintained by this other company called Kaseya, who I've never heard of and have never dealt with and don't even know exists. And then this morning, the store owners call me and tell me that all my gas stations, all my cash registers and all my pumps and everything are locked up with ransomware, and I'm out of business, right? I'm out of business. So all these extended threats through your supply chain are going to come at you. And again, very quickly, your ability to respond to these things is going to become who's going to be successful and who's not, right? I can't tell you where the next big supply chain disruption is going to happen. But I can tell you that the quicker you can respond to it and the quicker you understand if it's a threat to you and the quicker you can mitigate it is going to make a huge difference in your profitability. If I'm an airline and I can't get aviation gas, I'm out of business, right? I'm a hotel for angry people, right? So a lot of airlines were like, well, I buy from 6-7 different suppliers of aviation gas. That's not a problem. So we're good, right? We're fine. If one of them has a problem, I can just get the gas from someone else. Well, it turns out they all go through this company called Colonial Pipeline, which didn't actually bother having a chief security officer because it really wasn't an issue for them at the time. And now that they're out of business, and so I can't get any aviation gas, so I got to start canceling flights and issuing refunds. And for a problem we never even thought about. So again, I know we're out of time, and I appreciate your, kind of talking a lot. But this is a complicated subject, and a lot of this will be around the adoption. But I do believe in my heart of hearts that SBOM is the way to go as a direction, and that the current mechanisms and the current ways that we're doing it are just not sustainable anymore. It's just not. And as more things happen like Log4j, that it just becomes more and more obvious to everyone.
Stuart, thank you very much. Very, very important points. And of course, thank you, Dragos. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sanket, for all the important information. And the people that are watching us today, this YouTube video and live show will stay on YouTube, so you can continue watching and come back later on. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We'll see you in the next episodes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.